I shouldn't have opened my eyes right away. Something told me not to. The room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, and there was a hum coming from a machine somewhere near my left ear. I knew I was in a hospital before I could remember why. My body felt like it had been pressed flat and slowly reinflated. Everything tender, everything far away. But my mind was sharp, too sharp for the rest of me. I heard my son's voice first. Daniel was standing near the door. I could tell by the way the sound bounced. He was speaking low, the way he used to when he was a teenager hiding something. I recognized that register immediately, the way any mother would. 38 years of listening to that voice, and I still knew every version of it. "The house alone is worth $480," he said. "Maybe more if we sell before spring inventory picks up," his wife Kristen answered. Her voice was the kind that always sounded slightly impatient, like she was perpetually waiting for everyone around her to catch up. "What about the accounts? She had that joint thing with your father. That dissolved when Dad died. Everything reverted to her, which means now it reverts to you," Kristen said. And I heard the smile in it. I actually heard it. I kept my eyes closed. I kept my breathing exactly where it was. Slow, even, the rhythm of someone still unconscious. I had been a nurse for 31 years. I knew exactly what that looked like, and I performed it without thinking, the way you perform anything you've done 10,000 times. Daniel sighed, not a sad sigh, the kind of sigh a person makes when they're already mentally rearranging furniture. "I just want to make sure the timing is right. We need to let the dust settle. Give it a few weeks." "A few weeks," Kristen repeated, like she was tasting the words and finding them slightly too long. I lay there and listened to them discuss my kitchen table, my car, my mother's china that I had wrapped in newspaper myself and driven 14 hours from her house in Kentucky 20 years ago. I lay there and felt something happen inside me that I don't have a word for. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like a door closing, quiet, final. The accident had happened on a Tuesday. I remembered that much in fragments. I had been driving home from my friend Carol's house, taking the long way because the evening was beautiful. That particular shade of October gold that makes you want to stay inside it just a little longer. A truck had come through a red light at the intersection of Route 9 and Millbrook. That was the last clear thing I had. I had been in that hospital bed for 11 days before I heard my son plan what to do with my belongings. When Daniel and Kristen left that afternoon, I waited 20 minutes. Then I opened my eyes. A nurse I didn't recognize came in to check my vitals and almost knocked over her clipboard. She ran to get the attending physician, a tired-looking man named Dr. Okafor, who seemed genuinely pleased to see me awake, which told me something about how the previous 11 days had gone. He explained the extent of my injuries carefully: 3 fractured ribs, a collapsed lung that had been reinflated, a head injury significant enough to explain the coma, minor damage to my left knee. All of it survivable. All of it, with time, healable. I asked him one question before I asked anything else. "Who has been listed as my emergency contact?" He checked his tablet. "Daniel Mercer, your son. Has he been notified that I'm awake?" "Not yet. You've only just—" "Please don't contact him yet," I said. "I need a little time." Dr. Okafor looked at me the way people sometimes look at you when they sense something larger than the surface of the conversation. He nodded slowly. "Of course. You've been through considerable trauma. We'll give you some time to orient yourself." I thanked him, and then I lay in the blue-gray light of that room and thought, here is what I knew about my son before the accident, before the truck ran the light on Route 9, before any of this. Daniel had been a sweet child, genuinely sweet, the kind who brought me dandelions and asked serious questions and cried at the end of movies. I had raised him alone after his father, and I divorced when Daniel was 9, and I had worked double shifts and taken night classes and done everything I knew how to do. I thought we were close. I believed that completely. Then he had married Kristen. I want to be fair. I tried to be fair for 8 years. Kristen was not a cruel person in obvious ways. She was just efficient. She organized things. She organized Daniel. She organized their life together into something that increasingly had no room in it for anything that didn't serve a clear purpose. And I, apparently, had stopped serving a clear purpose sometime around my 62nd birthday. The invitations to holidays became suggestions. The Sunday calls became monthly. My grandchildren, 2 of them, a boy and a girl, started looking at me a little blankly when I arrived at their house, as if they were working to place me. My husband Robert had died 3 years before the accident. Heart attack, very sudden, the kind that doesn't give you time to say anything you meant to say. After that, I was alone in the house on Crestwood Drive, the house where Daniel had grown up, and I noticed how rarely the phone rang. I had told myself it was normal. That's what you tell yourself. Lying in that hospital bed, I stopped telling myself that. I asked a floor nurse, not Kristen's type, not the efficient kind, the warm kind, a woman named Denise, who had kind eyes and called me honey. I asked Denise if I could borrow her personal phone to make one call. I told her I needed to reach a close friend before I was ready to contact family. Denise didn't ask questions. She handed me her phone. Carol answered on the second ring. "It's Margaret," I said. There was a silence on the line that told me Carol had been crying recently. "Maggie." Her voice broke on the one word. "Oh, Maggie, I need you to listen carefully," I said. "And I need you to not tell anyone I've called." Carol and I had been friends for 22 years, long enough that she absorbed this without excessive questioning. "Okay," she said. "Tell me." I told her what I had heard. I told her all of it. When I finished, the silence on her end was a different kind. "That rat," Carol said finally. Then, more quietly, "Both of them. I need a favor," I said. "Anything. I need you to come here without telling Daniel, and I need you to bring Howard." Howard was Carol's husband. He was also a retired estate attorney. Carol arrived the next morning with Howard and a container of soup from my favorite diner that I couldn't eat yet, but that meant more than she knew. Howard sat in the chair beside my bed with a yellow legal pad, and we talked for 2 hours. What he told me, once we went through everything carefully, was more significant than I had realized. Robert had set up a trust before he died, a quiet one, the kind he never mentioned because Robert was the sort of man who expressed love through practical preparation rather than conversation. The house on Crestwood Drive was held inside that trust. The investment accounts he had spent 30 years building were held inside that trust. None of it had ever simply been mine in the way I had assumed, which meant none of it automatically passed the way my son had been calculating. "He can't touch any of it," Howard said, reading through the documents on his phone. "Not without your death being legally certified, not without the trust being dissolved, and the trustee named here is your brother in Georgia, not Daniel." I hadn't known about my brother being named. Robert had done that quietly too, knowing somehow what he was protecting against, even when I didn't. "There's more," Howard said. He set down the phone and looked at me with the careful expression of someone about to change the shape of a room. "The driver of the truck that hit you was operating a vehicle registered to Helcott Freight, a regional carrier. Their liability coverage is substantial. Given the extent of your injuries, your medical history, your age, your prior earnings as a nurse." He paused. "Maggie, you have a strong case, a very strong case." I stared at the ceiling for a moment. "How strong?" I said. He told me. I thought about the china from Kentucky. I thought about my mother's hands wrapping each piece in newspaper on a cold March afternoon. I thought about my son's voice saying 480, maybe more if we sell before spring. "Get me a good attorney," I said. I stayed in the hospital another week. During that time, Daniel called the nurse's station twice to check on my condition. He was told I remained in serious but stable condition, which was technically a version of the truth. I had asked Doctor, Okafor used that phrase specifically, and he had agreed with the particular neutrality of a man who understood more than he was saying. I did not call my son. I did not call Kristen. I called my brother Warren in Georgia, who cried on the phone for 5 minutes straight before he pulled himself together and asked what I needed. I told him everything. Warren, who had never particularly liked Daniel's wife, listened to the whole story with the focused silence of a man who had spent 30 years solving other people's problems. "Where are you going when they discharge you?" he asked. "I've been thinking about that." "You're coming here." "Warren." "Elaine has the guest room ready," he said. Elaine was his wife. "Don't argue with me, Maggie. You just came back from the dead." So that was what I did. The discharge happened on a quiet Thursday morning. Carol drove me. We left early, before visiting hours, before the day had fully organized itself. I signed forms. I was given prescriptions. I was helped into Carol's sedan with a patience I had to accept graciously. My ribs still hurt with every breath. My knee ached. But I was upright. I was moving. I did not go back to the house on Crestwood Drive. I didn't say goodbye to anything in it. I thought about the horse figurine on the kitchen windowsill, a cast iron thing Robert had bought me at a flea market early in our marriage, small and heavy and familiar. I thought about the quilt my grandmother made that was folded on the chest at the end of the bed. I thought, those things know who they belong to. They'll keep. Carol drove me to Warren's, 12 hours south, and we talked the whole way about nothing important, old stories, mutual friends, a television show we both watched and both complained about while continuing to watch. She did not ask me how I was feeling about Daniel. She understood that the time for that conversation was later, or maybe never. I moved into Warren and Elaine's guest room, which had yellow curtains and smelled like cedar, and I began the work of recovering. Here is what recovering looks like at 63, when 3 ribs and 1 lung and 1 knee and 1 life have been fractured and reinflated. It is slow. It is a renegotiation with your own body. There were mornings I woke up and simply existed for an hour before I could consider anything else. There were afternoons I sat in the backyard and watched the light change and thought about nothing, and found that this was not emptiness, but something closer to clarity. The attorney Howard connected me with was a woman named Patricia Reeves, based in Atlanta, who handled personal injury and wrongful conduct cases, and who had a manner that was simultaneously warm and absolutely precise. She took my case. She reviewed everything. She was not surprised by the numbers she arrived at. "The freight company's insurance has already reached out," she told me during our 3rd call. "They want to settle. Quickly." "How quickly?" "They made an initial offer yesterday." She paused. "I told them to come back with something serious. They came back. Then they came back again. The final number they settled on, after 4 months and several increasingly pointed letters from Patricia, was $11 million, structured partly as a lump sum and partly across 10 years, with a lump sum going first. I sat on the phone with Patricia when she told me the final figure, and I thought about a lot of things in a short amount of time. I thought about 31 years of double shifts and night classes. I thought about Robert. I thought about the truck that came through a red light on a Tuesday evening in October, when the light was that particular color of gold. "Accept it," I said. During those months in Georgia, a few things happened that I want to account for. My grandchildren called me. Not Daniel's doing, I learned later, that my granddaughter Emma, who was 14, had found my cell number herself and called it on a Sunday afternoon. She had been told by her parents that I was recovering at a facility, which was not entirely false, and she had accepted this, but something in her had needed to hear my voice. We talked for 40 minutes. She told me about school and a book she was reading and a fight she'd had with her best friend. I told her about the cardinal that came to Warren's bird feeder every morning, so bold and so red it looked like someone had placed it there on purpose. She laughed at something I said. It was the best sound I had heard in months. After that, Emma called every Sunday. I did not tell her not to tell her parents. I did not ask her to keep secrets. I simply talked with her, and whatever she chose to do with that was her own. The other thing that happened was this. Daniel, around month 3, apparently went to look into the house. He arrived at Crestwood Drive with what I'm told was a real estate agent, and found everything exactly as I had left it locked, intact, belonging to the trust. He called the trustee, which was Warren. Warren told him, very calmly, and with the particular courtesy of someone who has thought carefully about what they're going to say, that no assets would be accessible without the express written consent of the trust's primary beneficiary, who remained alive, who was in good health, and who had been fully briefed on all relevant conversations that had taken place in a hospital room on the 11th day of November. I did not hear this conversation. Warren told me about it afterward. He said there was a long silence on Daniel's end after that last part. I can imagine it. There is a question I have been sitting with through all of this, through the long afternoons in Georgia, and the slow mornings, and the phone calls with Patricia, and the Sunday conversations with Emma. The question is not whether my son is a good person. I think he is. Somewhere underneath everything Kristen's calculations had built around him over 8 years. I think the boy who brought me dandelions is still in there, layered under mortgages and ambition, and a wife who organized love the way she organized closets by usefulness. The question is whether that matters. I think about it the way you think about a scar. You don't forget it's there, but at some point it stops being the first thing you notice about yourself. 6 months after the accident, Patricia finalized the settlement. I was in Georgia, sitting in the yellow-curtained room with a cup of coffee, when she called to confirm the first transfer would process within 30 days. I said thank you. I hung up. Elaine knocked on the door 20 minutes later to tell me dinner was almost ready, and I said I'd be right down, and I sat for another minute with the quiet of it. Then I went downstairs and had dinner with my brother's family, and it was a good dinner, and I ate all of it. I bought a small house. Not in Georgia. I love Warren and Elaine, but I am not a woman built for permanent houseguest status. I bought it in a town in the mountains of North Carolina that I had driven through once 20 years earlier and never forgotten. A town with a river and a farmer's market on Saturdays, and a hardware store that had been in the same family for 4 generations. The house had a porch that faced east, which meant the mornings were extraordinary. I put the cast-iron horse on the windowsill above the kitchen sink. I had asked Carol to go to Crestwood Drive and get it for me, and she had wrapped it in newspaper the way my mother used to, and mailed it down in a flat-rate box. When I unpacked it, I held it for a moment before I set it down. My grandmother's quilt is at the foot of my bed. Emma came to visit me in the spring, just her. She told her parents she was going to a school friend's house for the weekend, and instead she took a bus. I was not entirely surprised when she appeared at my door with a backpack, and her father's eyes, and her own particular brand of quiet determination. I made her call her parents immediately, which she did, and there was a difficult phone call, and I did not intervene in it, because it was not my conversation to intervene in, but I let her stay the weekend. We walked along the river on Saturday morning. She asked me about the accident. I told her what I thought she was old enough to hear, which was most of it. She listened the way teenagers sometimes listen when they're working very hard to understand something that troubles them about the people they love. I don't know why my mom is like that, she said finally. She wasn't crying, but it was close. You don't have to know why, I said. You just have to decide who you want to be. She thought about that for a while. I have not spoken to Daniel since before the accident. I've thought about whether that's the right thing, whether I should be the one to extend something, the way mothers are supposed to. But I keep coming back to what I heard in that hospital room, the voice I recognized across 38 years, the tone of a man already measuring the square footage. And I think some doors close on their own because they were never quite latched to begin with. It is not my job to force them back open. Carol visits every few months. She and Howard are talking about retiring, and she has mentioned the mountains in a way that suggests she's picturing something specific. I told her there are houses for sale on the next street over, She laughed. "We'll see," she said. "I am 64 now. My ribs healed completely. My lung is fine. My knee gives me a little trouble in cold weather, which is the honest price of falling in love with a mountain town. In the mornings, I sit on the east-facing porch with my coffee, and I watch the light come in over the ridge, that slow, particular gold of it, and I think about all the versions of a life you don't know you're living until you've already lived them. I am not telling this story because I want anyone to feel sorry for me. I don't need that. I am telling it because I was 63 years old, lying in a hospital bed with 3 broken ribs and a reinflated lung, and I made a decision to stop pretending I hadn't heard what I heard. That is the whole story. That is the only lesson in it. The truck came through the light on a Tuesday in October when the evening was gold, and I was taking the long way home. I survived. The rest was just deciding what to do next.